I never imagined that a single event would turn my entire world upside down. My name is Sister Elizabeth Johnson and I'm a 42-year-old nun. I've lived in the monastery for several years now, far away from the buzzing world of technology one once called home. But it wasn't always like this. Before taking my vows, I was a senior software engineer at one of Silicon Valley's largest tech companies. I led teams that developed social media algorithms, believing, like so many others, that I understood the true power and impact of technology. After all, I had seen it firsthand. I watched as these platforms connected people across the globe. I thought I was helping to build a bridge that would unite humanity. But what I didn't realize back then was how deeply it would fracture us spiritually. Life in the monastery has been a contrast: simplicity, quiet, and prayer. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. I should have felt more connected to God, to the sisters around me. But instead, I often found myself worrying about our monastery's digital outreach programs and whether we were doing enough to reach younger generations. I was surrounded by people, yet I couldn't help but feel isolated. It was during this time, while I was reflecting on my past, that something happened that would change everything. One evening, I went up to the bell tower to prepare for the evening prayers. We had been having electrical issues for weeks, and despite multiple attempts at repair, the problem remained. As I reached for the bell rope, a sudden surge of electricity shot through me. The last thing I remember was the overwhelming sensation of being thrown backward, pain surging through my body, and then nothing. Pure silence. I woke up to the sound of frantic voices. At first, I thought I was still dreaming, suspended somewhere between life and death. But then the cold air hit my skin, and I realized I was lying on the cold stone floor of the monastery's bell tower. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, but something was different. There was a stillness inside me, a strange peace that didn't belong to this world. I tried to sit up, but my body refused to respond. The feeling of being detached from myself was overwhelming, as if I wasn't entirely sure where my physical form ended and my soul began. My eyes slowly scanned the room, and I saw the familiar faces of my fellow sisters, though they seemed so far away. Sister Margaret was performing CPR on me, while Sister Claire was frantically dialing emergency services. It felt as though I were watching a scene from a distant memory, one I couldn't quite place, one that wasn't mine. But then my gaze fell upon something that struck me like a lightning bolt. My phone. It lay next to my body, still glowing with the prayer app one had been using earlier that evening. Even in death, it was there, demanding attention just like it always did. I remember feeling a strange mixture of detachment and irony. In the moment of my death, I saw that little screen glowing, its digital presence so stark against the backdrop of my spiritual experience. It was almost as if that phone, my connection to the world, refused to let me go even as I left it behind. The moment felt prophetic. I didn't understand it then, but I would soon. The next thing I remember was the paramedics arriving. I had been clinically dead for 6 minutes. They worked on me for another 12 minutes until they finally brought my heart back to life. But it wasn't just my heart that was revived that night. Something inside me had changed. When I finally regained consciousness, I was no longer in the monastery. The world I had known, my body, my thoughts, faded into something else entirely. I found myself floating as though suspended in an endless sea of light. The sensation of weightlessness was soothing, but it wasn't the kind of light I had ever imagined. It wasn't just bright, it was alive. Pulsed with consciousness, with love, with understanding. I began to move through this light, feeling it surround me, envelop me, and guide me forward. There was no fear, no pain, just a deep sense of peace. As I moved, I realized I wasn't alone. Something or someone was with me. It felt like a presence, familiar yet incomprehensible, and I instinctively knew who it was. Jesus. But not as I had known him before. Not as the figure in the church paintings or the solemn, distant figure I had prayed to. This was him in his purest, most radiant form, embodied love itself. His presence was so overwhelming, I felt myself fall to my knees in reverence, though I had no physical body. My beloved daughter. He spoke not with words, but with an understanding that bypassed language altogether. His voice was a wave of compassion, a direct communication of spirit to spirit. There is much I must show you about the world you've left behind. And then the visions began. First, he showed me the connections between people, golden threads of light that connected each soul to another and to him. These were the divine bonds, the true spiritual connections we were meant to have. I felt an overwhelming sense of love and purity radiating from these threads, as if they were a reflection of God's presence within us. But then as we moved through time, the threads began to change. They thinned, became weaker, and were replaced by something else. Digital connections. They looked similar, but they lacked the warmth, the power, the divine energy that came from real human connection. I could feel it deep in my soul, the shift from the sacred to the artificial. The realization hit me like a wave. I had spent years working on those very tools, the very systems that had replaced these divine connections with something hollow. The visions continued, each more vivid than the last. Jesus showed me the evolution of human technology, from the first simple tools to the printing press, the Industrial Revolution, and then to the digital age, the world I had known so well. But what struck me wasn't the technology itself. It was how it had evolved from something that had the potential to connect humanity to something that, in many ways, was now separating us from one another and from God. Jesus turned to me, his eyes filled with a deep, sorrowful understanding. "Look carefully," he said, drawing my attention to the threads that connected people. At first they were strong, golden, and radiant, but with the advent of digital technology, these threads began to shift into something artificial, cold, and distant. The human soul's divine connection to others and to God was being replaced by a false connection. A digital link that, while appearing similar on the surface, was spiritually hollow. I could feel the weight of this truth settle over me. These notifications, these likes, these algorithms I had once helped create. These were the things now feeding the souls of humanity, not God's love. The dopamine hits people got from their phones, the constant validation through social media, was not a genuine connection. It was an empty substitute, like food that looked nourishing but had no substance. People were starving spiritually, and I had been one of the architects of this system. I was shown the horrific truth of how social media algorithms worked. Each notification, each ping from a phone, released a small hit of dopamine that mimicked connection. People felt it, they craved it, but it was never enough. It was fleeting. People like me had become addicted to the very tools we had created to bring us closer together. I saw it clearly now, the profound spiritual damage that technology was causing. People, in their search for validation, were slipping further away from the genuine, deep connections they were meant to have with God and with each other. The very thing that was supposed to bring humanity closer together was now driving us apart, causing a slow and insidious spiritual decline. Jesus spoke again, his voice heavy with compassion. "Your work, my daughter, has helped shape this world, but now you must see it for what it truly is. The world is searching for me, but they are looking in all the wrong places." The next thing I remember, I was gasping for air. The sterile smell of the hospital room hit me like a wave, and I blinked, disoriented. The doctors surrounding me were in disbelief. They said it was a miracle, that my recovery was medically impossible. The electrical burns that should have been fatal caused minimal damage. But the real miracle wasn't the physical healing. It was the message I had been given. As the days passed, I began to process everything I had seen. The visions, the overwhelming love, and the terrible truth about how technology had distorted our spiritual lives. I felt an urgency rising within me, a call to do something, to share what I had witnessed. I knew I couldn't let the world continue down this path without warning them. It wasn't just about the dangers of technology, it was about the hope of redemption and healing. The possibility of using these powerful tools in a way that could bring us closer to God, not further away. I started writing, documenting everything I had seen during those 18 minutes of being clinically dead. The doctors were stunned by my recovery, but I knew my real work had just begun. The most important thing I learned wasn't about technology, it was about love. God's love, the love that never fades, that transcends the digital world, and that can heal even the deepest wounds of our souls. The memories of my experience weighed heavily on me, but I also felt empowered. I was given a purpose: to share the truth about technology's potential to either uplift or destroy. Jesus had shown me that we could reclaim the genuine connections we once had, but it would require a conscious effort, a turning back to God. It wasn't too late, but we had to act before we lost everything. My mission was clear: help others reconnect with their true source of love, with God and with each other. I would do this not by condemning technology, but by awakening hearts and minds to its true purpose. As I lay in that hospital bed, writing down my testimony, I knew my life had forever changed. The question now was, would I be brave enough to share this message with the world?